It was a cool, brisk afternoon. You just got to the peak of that hill, and so you released your cane, letting it fall down into the grass, followed by a bump as you let your butt do the same. The breeze then picked up, running a slight chill up your arms, but you could care less. It just felt good to get off your feet for a second. You then looked down the east across the countryside of Judea. You remember from your childhood that you could just catch a glimpse of the Sea of Galilee on a good, clear day. Now to the west, you could see nothing but mountains and countryside. That Mediterranean Sea, it was a good 30 miles away, so you could never see it from here. And that city of Sepphoris, it only sits a couple of miles to the north behind you with nothing but mountains and valleys in between. But what you came to see, a sight for your sore aging eyes, was to the south, only half a mile, just down over this hill that you're now resting on. By the looks of it, it is still a small town, a simple town by the name of Nazareth. Yes, you can now smile. You remember still that little hut you once called home. The thought that instantly came to mind was that day that you sat there having dreams of your wedding day. That day you were making the list of who you were going to invite. Your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, your neighbors, and your friends. But then thoughts suddenly became interrupted. Interrupted by a voice, the voice of an angel. That angel Gabriel, yes, his message was perplexing. Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. Do not be afraid. He then continued, Mary, you have found favor with God. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name of Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. Yes. Now you smile. Now you can. But then that day, no. No, you didn't smile. Rather, you had 1,000 questions instantly racing through your mind. Questions like, what about Joseph? What about your parents? What about your wedding? What will people say? What will people do? Who are you to do this? In your eyes, all you were was just a poor, young, ordinary girl. You were a nobody. Why would God choose you? What will the neighbors think? What about Joseph? He had pledged to marry you only a few weeks ago, and now you are his wife-to-be. Will he get mad? Will he break off the engagement? Will everybody blame him? But what would it be like to bear a child? Not just an ordinary child, but the Son of God. You were taught about this by your parents. You were taught those messages in Isaiah and Micah. He was to come. He would save his people from their sins. He was to be the Messiah. Yes, even now as you sit here looking down at Nazareth, memories of that day still runs chills up your back. That was 45 years ago. You were only 12 and a half, with a lot yet to learn. That day was a simple day towards the end of March. Planning would soon begin, but after that day, planning was the last thing on your mind. No, now you could almost care less. Suddenly, once more, the breeze picks up, and you again look back down into that little town of Nazareth. You remember some of the names still, but you were young then. Who would remember you now? Better yet, who would still be alive? God had plans for you, that simple little peasant girl. How could you have ever even dreamed the plans he had for you? You were scared. Yeah. Scared beyond belief. But then that angel Gabriel, he continued to speak to you. His words then were that of reassurance. Do not be afraid, for nothing is impossible with God. Yes, those words of Gabriel's did bring peace to you that day. Peace, or maybe even excitement. The thoughts flooded your mind. You could only dream of holding God's Son in your arms, let alone being the one to bear him, that child, God's child. Yes, pleasant thoughts suddenly flooded your simple adolescent mind. So you responded to Gabriel, I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said. Did you actually then fathom what all that meant? How would your life be different now if you would have said no? Would you have been living still down there in Nazareth, stuck there all of your life? Would you have a family of maybe a dozen kids, and each of them having a dozen of their own? How would you ever have enough money to pay the taxes from year to year, to feed their hungry mouths, to marry off your daughters? How would your life be different now if you would have just said no? But you didn't. No, God used you, an ordinary teenage girl. He used you to bring glory to himself. God fulfilled his promise, yes. And so you bore him a son, Jesus. Jesus who was the Son of God. Still now you chuckle as you reflect back on those years, the times you held him to nurse, or that day he first sat up, or even that day he first walked those couple of steps. Those years he played with the neighbors, and those years he worked beside Joseph. Even that spring day, he stayed behind there at the temple. Yeah, then the two of you had to run back to Jerusalem to find him, but you found him there. They're testing those Pharisees. Yeah. He then was already smarter than them. You smile now. You had the honor to watch him grow up, to watch him become a man. But you still sadly also remember that other spring morning and afternoon there on Golgotha. Those 6 hours you sat at the foot of his cross. It all happened as he said it was. It was that afternoon he looked down at you and then to his disciple John. And he said to you, dear woman, here is your son. And then to John he said, here is your mother. Yeah, John, he had taken good care of you. He took very good care of you. Well, that pain you felt that day on the hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull, you will never forget it. It sticks with you still, but the joy, however, replaced that pain. Only 3 days later, he no longer was behind that stone tomb. His clothes, they were left behind, left there as a witness. He no longer walked on earth as your simple son. No, Gabriel's words to you then came back that blessed morning. You remembered him saying, nothing is impossible with God. And how true that was. What a blessed thought to treasure. Nothing is impossible with God. Now as the sun begins to set, you once again grab your cane and place it on the ground and force yourself back up. You pull your hanky out now and wipe those tears of joy from your eyes. You again look down on that village in Nazareth as the sun begins to set, and amazingly you listen to the pounding of some nails being hit by a hammer. Yes, those childhood memories of a father and a son working in that shed out back together, they quickly still come to your mind. But also the sound of those nails being pounded into his hands and feet. That image still runs chills up your back. One day soon you will never be chilly again. Arthritis also will then no longer bother you. You will no longer hunger. No, you will instead get to see them both in that promised land. What a day that will be. What a blessed day. But for now you can still recall your words to Gabriel that morning. I am the Lord's servant. And you realize you still have some work yet to do. There are still many on that island of Patmos yet to be reached. So you must return. Nazareth, a past you will never forget, a treasure you will forever treasure in your heart. An early stepping point in your life. You know, it's sort of amazes me to think of a 6th or a 7th grade girl today getting married and bearing a child. What would be going through their minds? Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I picture them still playing with dolls and thinking boys are creepy. Not planning on a wedding and the running of a household and what to name their first child. Maybe God's decision doesn't make much sense to you either. To understand that God chose his King of the Jews to be born into such a poor family, born in such an insignificant city there at the fringes of Israel. Certainly, if a king was to be born, it would have had to be better to have him born with a high-ranking officer or wealthy parents who would provide him with the finest of everything. But instead, God chose the lowest to do the greatest of things. Nothing is impossible with God. And so he chose Mary. But maybe that was smart. Maybe that took politics out of the question. Maybe it took having something to lose out of the equation. Maybe that brought the true heart into the solution. Actually, a couple of things about Mary jumped out at me while preparing this story. First, Mary understood God's calling. Almost like God stood there saying, Mary, you are the one I have chosen to carry my child. Together, you and I are going to bring hope and light into this darkened world. Now, I realize God never spoke directly to her, but he had to have touched her heart with such a peace through Gabriel's face and words that he helped Mary understand that through him all things are possible. You just need to first step out in faith. God, he also helped Mary believe that he could do the great thing through her in that little village, probably no bigger than Saito. He still had plans for her. As I often preach, he has plans for each one of us. Mary was no greater than any one of us here. Yet he did wonders with and through her. She needed to only trust and step forward in faith. And that she did. That she did. Now, the last thing that Mary did that amazed me was she submitted to God's will completely without any hesitation. She gave him her all. She never held back. Though Mary did not fully comprehend, she still believed. And she still stepped forward in faith. Faith means committing one's way to the Lord, trusting him and knowing that he will do whatever is best. It took a lot of faith to do that, as Mary did. So do me a favor. Take some time today, and reflect over your past. Look back at your life, especially when you were Mary's age. When you were 13 years old, maybe 14. Were you like her, sometimes acting like you were 33? Just think being a mother to God's child. It had to be indescribable. How would you have done being his earthly parent at age 13? Amazingly, God knew she could do it. He also knows that each one of us is truly capable of doing it. We just need to step out in faith and trust him with all of our hearts and let him use us in ways we never would have imagined. Think back to that home you lived in when you were 13 years old. How has your life changed? And how has he provided and used you since? Better yet, how can he take what he has taught you and use it for the betterment of his kingdom yet? Let him lead you. And like Mary, never hold back, because nothing is impossible with God. Now, I had to think back. 1984, the year I turned 13. Ronald Reagan, I think, was president and just starting his second term of office. I just finished my first year of scouting, making second class. Gas then was only around $1 a gallon, and how I wish it was still only $1 a gallon. The commercial of the year, as some of you will remember, Where's the Beef?, which was a Wendy's commercial. The Summer Olympics were held in Los Angeles that summer. Driving them was just a figment of my imagination. I want to think that I was also probably beaten just about every day by my two older brothers. I guess that was just growing up. And I was in 7th grade. Girls, forget that. They were the last thing on my mind then. But God was already then molding the clay into what He wanted me to become. 7th grade industrial arts teacher was Mr. Cavada, and I ran a printing press for the first time in my life, and I felt a calling, a passion to do it. But He still had other plans for me beyond my imagination then. He has plans for each one of us. We may think we know what they are, but when He guides you, when He touches your life, you don't hold back. You trust Him, and you continue walking forward wherever He leads you to go.